Tonight, we are going to talk about one of the most fascinating, most deeply written, and most quietly terrifying characters ever to emerge from the world of Runeterra. A man who hides behind a white porcelain mask. A man who counts everything, every step, every breath, every bullet, and who believes, with every cell in his body, that what he does is not murder. He calls it art. His name is Jhin. The world knows him as the Virtuoso. And once, long ago, the people of Ionia knew him by a different name entirely. They called him the Golden Demon, and they were afraid in the way that people are afraid of things they cannot explain. Things that leave no footprints. Things that smile at you from behind a mask. You never quite see. Stay with me. We are going to go all the way back to the beginning, to a quiet province in Ionia, where the mountains are draped in mist, and the rivers carry the sound of temple bells, to a place where a boy with no name that history remembers grew up in the shadow of a martial arts school that the world was slowly forgetting. We are going to talk about who Jhin was, where he came from, what shaped him, who hunted him, who imprisoned him, who set him free, and what he became after all of that. This is the complete lore of Jhin, and it begins with a land that, for all its beauty, was never as peaceful as it appeared. To understand Jhin, you first have to understand Ionia, because Jhin is not separate from his homeland. He is, in many ways, a dark mirror of it, a reflection of everything Ionia tries to keep hidden beneath its serene surface. Ionia is one of the oldest and most magical places in all of Runeterra. It is an archipelago, a collection of islands nestled in warm waters, blanketed in ancient forests, and crisscrossed by rivers that run clear and cold from mountains whose peaks are lost in the clouds. Its people are spiritual above all else. They believe in balance. They believe in the deep, invisible connection between the material world and the spirit realm that lies just beyond the edge of sight. Ionian culture is built on the arts, on philosophy, on restraint, on the idea that beauty and harmony are not just pleasant things, they are sacred. Poetry, painting, dance, music, theatre, these are not hobbies in Ionia. They are ways of touching something divine. And this love of beauty runs so deep that it shapes even the way Ionian people fight, the way they grieve, the way they fall in love, and the way they die. For centuries, Ionia stood apart from the wars of the world. Its people were not warriors, in the way that Noxus was a nation of warriors. They did not build empires. They did not march armies across continents. They tended their temples, practiced their martial forms, painted their silk scrolls, and trusted that the balance they cherished would protect them. It would not, of course. Nothing ever does. The Noxian invasion would come eventually, crashing against Ionia like a wave against a cliff, violent, relentless, and deeply scarring. But that is not where this story begins. Our story begins in a southern province of Ionia called Jhin, in the long quiet before the storm. Jhin is mountain country, steep, misty, threaded with narrow passes and small farming settlements that cling to the hillsides like they are afraid of falling. It is the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where festivals are marked by lantern light on the river, and where the old stories are still told. Stories of spirit creatures that roam the highland paths, of demons that wear human faces, of things that should not be. The people of Jhin were proud. They had their own travelling theatres, their own opera traditions, their own poets and painters who moved from village to village, performing for coins and good food, singing the old songs, staging the old stories. It was into this world. into this culture of performance, of borrowed faces and temporary identities, of stages built and struck and rebuilt again somewhere new. That a boy was born whose real name no one would ever learn with certainty. We know him as Jhin, but that was not his name from birth. That was a name he chose for himself, and it means something. In the old Ionian tongues, Jhin translates to something close to golden excellence. A name that tells you, right from the beginning, exactly what this man thought of himself. Very little is known about Jhin's early life, and that is deliberate. He is a man who constructed himself from almost nothing, a man who understood, perhaps from a very young age, that identity is just another kind of mask. The details that have survived tell us only the broadest outlines, and even those feel like clues left for us, rather than facts accidentally preserved. His father ran a martial arts school. It was not an especially famous school. It was not the kind of establishment that drew students from across the continent or produced legendary masters. It was a small school in a small province, teaching forms and disciplines that had been passed down for generations. There was dignity in it. There was tradition. But there was also a shadow falling over it, because across Ionia, the name of Wuju was rising. Wuju was not just a fighting style. It was a philosophy, a way of living, and it was capturing the imagination of Jhin. Everyone who wanted to study the art of combat. The discipline that Jhin's father taught was being left behind. Slowly but surely, the way a stream gets quietly forgotten when a great river runs nearby. The school shrank. The students went elsewhere. The income dried like water on warm stone. This detail is not insignificant. A father who once had authority, whose craft was once respected, slowly losing his relevance. And a boy watching that happen. A boy who grew up seeing what it meant when the world forgot you. A boy who perhaps made a quiet, wordless, devastating vow that he would not be forgotten. That whatever he made, the world would remember it. He was a bright child by all accounts. Curious, skilled with his hands, drawn to beauty in a way that was a little unusual, even for a culture that loved the arts. He helped at his father's school. He learned the basics of the key techniques his father taught. The channeling of inner energy into physical motion, the discipline of breath and intention. Those techniques would stay with him. They would echo through everything that came later. But more than the martial training, the young Jhin was shaped by the theatre. Jun's travelling opera, troops moved through the region in a constant slow rotation, setting up their stages in town squares and temple courtyards, performing the great Ionian epics to audiences who watched with the kind of focused silence reserved for sacred things. And the boy who would become Jhin watched them too. He watched them obsessively, studying not just the performances themselves, but the machinery behind them. The costumes, the staging, the way light played against silk screens, the way a single well-timed gesture could make an entire crowd hold its breath. He began working as a stagehand. It was the natural extension of his fascination. And it is here, in the backstage shadows of Jun's travelling theatres, that the name Jhin appears for the first time in any record. Not a famous name, not a celebrated one. Just a quiet young man with clever hands, who knew every rope and pulley in every theatre he worked in, and who watched the performers from the wings, with eyes that noticed everything. Nobody who knew him then suspected what was growing inside him. Or if they did, they said nothing about it. It started in the way that terrible things often start, quietly, in the dark, in the margins of things. Travellers who went into the mountain passes and did not come back. A farmstead found silent in the early morning, the animals still in their pens, but the people gone or worse than gone. Small at first, isolated, the kind of thing that could be explained away as a wolf, a spirit, a tragedy, a coincidence. Jhin was somewhere between 19 and 21 years old when his first known killings began. He was working as a stagehand, still moving with the theatre troupes through the province of Jhin, still blending into the background of other people's performances. And somewhere in that time, he began to perform his own. The victims were found in grotesque arrangements. They were not simply dead, they had been transformed. Their bodies were positioned with great care, with an attention to aesthetics that was deeply unsettling, precisely because it was obvious. Whoever was doing this was not in a frenzy, was not driven by animal rage. The murders were considered. They were deliberate. They were, in the coldest possible sense of the word, staged. He used blades in those early years. Key-infused blades, taking the techniques his father had taught him, and twisting them into something his father could never have imagined. The way the key energy could be channeled, directed, focused, applied, gave those early killings a quality that no natural predator could have produced. This was not a beast. This was a craftsman. The province began to whisper, then to speak openly, then to cry out. Armed militias were formed to patrol the mountain passes. Demon hunters were brought in from other parts of Ionia, specialists in dealing with spirit creatures and malevolent presences. Wuju masters lent their skills to the search. None of it made a difference. The killings continued, spreading beyond Jhin now, reaching as far as the adjacent provinces of Shonsen and Galrin. The death toll climbed, and with it climbed the fear, because the people of Ionia had a framework for understanding evil. It came in the form of spirits, demons, corrupted entities from the spirit realm that crossed into the material world to cause harm. That was a language they understood. That was a horror they had tools for dealing with. The rituals, the wards, the masters of the Kinko order who maintained the boundary between worlds. These existed precisely for such threats. But what was happening in Jhin did not fit that framework. The death scenes did not carry the signature of spirit corruption. There was intention here. There was human intention. There was artistry. And that, more than the violence itself, was what made people's skin go cold at night. Because if it was not a demon, then it was one of them. And that was, in many ways, worse. The province gave the killer a name, the Golden Demon. Part out of habit, because calling something a demon made it less intimate, and part because of the strange, glittering quality of some of the crime scenes, the way certain arrangements seemed to catch the light in a way that was almost beautiful. If you could look past what you were seeing, the legend grew. It was told in whispers first, then in hushed voices over evening fires, then in the urgent tone of people who needed to make sense of something that made no sense. Depicted in plays, referenced in poems, used by parents to warn children away from the mountain paths after dark. The Golden Demon became something larger than the man who had made it. And that, of course, was exactly what he wanted. He was performing. He had always been performing. The tragedy is that almost no one realized it. The Council of Jhin had tried everything they could think of, and everything had failed. Their militia patrols were too slow, their demon hunters too confused, their Wuju masters too focused on a threat they could fight directly. The Golden Demon did not fight directly. The Golden Demon staged ambushes that were really theatrical productions. The Golden Demon killed 4 people before vanishing like smoke, in desperation, and it was desperation. The kind that makes powerful people humble. The The Council of Jhin sent an envoy north. They went to ask the great master Kusho of the King Co-order for help. The King Co-order is one of the most respected institutions in all of Ionia. Their purpose is to maintain the balance between the spirit realm and the material world, to ensure that neither side overwhelms the other, that the boundary between them remains stable and clear. They are not warriors in the way of most fighters. They are guardians, they are arbiters, and Kusho was their greatest master, a man of tremendous skill, deep wisdom, and the kind of calm authority that made people feel, in his presence, that things might actually be all right. Kusho listened to the envoy from Jhin, and then he told them he could not help. He had pressing matters, other obligations, and he was sorry for their troubles. The envoy went home, and a week later, without announcement, without fanfare, Kusho packed quietly and left with 2 companions, his teenage son, Shen, and his most talented apprentice, a young man who was not yet called Zed, but who would one day carry that name into shadow and legend. He traveled south to Jhin, disguised as a merchant, and began to work. Why the secrecy? Because Kusho was a careful man, and he suspected from the very beginning that something unusual was happening. A predator smart enough to avoid every trap, skilled enough to leave behind nothing useful. This was not a creature to be startled into running. This was a creature that needed to be understood before it could be caught. So instead of arriving as Great Master Kusho, feared and respected throughout the land, he arrived as an anonymous traveler. He visited the families who had lost people. He sat with them in their grief and listened to everything they could remember. He went to the crime scenes, sometimes weeks or months old, but still carrying the silent testimony of what had happened. And he looked, not for tracks, not for the physical evidence that anyone else might look for. He looked for pattern. He looked for intention. He looked for the hidden meaning in the arrangement of things. He brought Shen and Zed with him, and together the 3 of them built a picture, slowly, the way you assemble something fragile from many small pieces. The investigation took 4 years. 4 years of moving through Jhin. 4 years of crime scenes and grieving families and cold mountain nights. And the growing, oppressive weight of the knowledge that somewhere nearby, a predator was watching them even as they watched for it. 4 years of learning everything there was to know about a killer who left behind almost nothing traceable. Those 4 years changed all 3 of them, and not in small ways. Kusho's hair, which had been a vivid, distinctive red for as long as anyone had known him, turned white. Not gradually. White, the way hair goes white, when something drains the color from a person. He continued to work with the same patience and methodical precision, but something behind his eyes had shifted. He had seen things in those crime scenes that would not leave him. Shen, who had been known before this as a young man of quick wit and easy humor, the kind of person who could find the funny angle on almost anything, became somber. The humor did not return when the investigation ended. It stayed buried under whatever he had carried away from Jhin, and it would take a very long time to surface again, if it ever truly did. And Zed, brilliant, fierce, burning with the intensity of a star, began to struggle, not with the physical demands of the investigation, not with the danger, but with something inside himself, some internal reckoning he was not yet equipped to resolve. He had witnessed the aftermath of what the Golden Demon had done to real people, to real families. He had seen suffering organized into spectacle, and something in him had broken in a way that would not heal properly, would instead fuse at a wrong angle and pull him toward a path that no one who, knew him at the start of those 4 years, would have predicted. Kusho found the pattern. After 4 long years, he found it. It was not in the locations. It was not in the timing, exactly. Though timing mattered, it was in the nature of the events that surrounded the killings. The Golden Demon, Kusho realized, was drawn to performances, to audiences, to gatherings where theater and art and the assembled attention of many people created the kind of charged atmosphere that he needed for his work. More than drawn. He was embedded. He was part of those performances. He was one of the stagehands, the crew, the anonymous workforce that made theatre happen, and whom the audience never looked at twice. And this realization carried with it another, more unsettling one. The Golden Demon was not a spirit, was not a demon in any literal sense. He was a man. A human man, ordinary in appearance, who moved through normal society with an unremarkable face and hands that could pull ropes and shift scenery, and who in the spaces between one performance and the next went out in the dark and made something that, in his own mind, was art. Kusho is quoted as saying, upon realizing this, "Good and evil are not truths. They are born from the assumptions of men." This was not a throwaway philosophical observation. It was a statement about what he had spent 4 years coming to understand. The Golden Demon was not evil in the way that a spirit could be evil, corrupted, othered, defined by its opposition to human life. He was a person who had made choices, and who had a reason for those choices, and who would have to be dealt with as a person rather than as a monster. The trap was laid at Jhin Pass on the Garjan River on the eve of the Spirit Blossom Festival. The Spirit Blossom Festival was, and remains, one of the most beautiful events in the Ionian calendar, a celebration of the boundary between the living world and the realm of those who have passed on. Lanterns on the water, flowers and silk, and the sound of music drifting across rivers in the night, and of course, performances, theatre, the precise kind of gathering that would draw the Golden Demon like a moth to a flame. Kusho disguised himself as a calligrapher of some renown and took his place among the other invited artists. Shen and Zed moved through the crowd and the backstage areas, invisible in their own way, watching. They were not there to be heroes. They were there to close a trap. And that evening, on the eve of the festival, with the river running silver under a full moon, the trap closed. The famed Golden Demon, the monster that had haunted the province of Jhin for years, that had reshaped the nightmares of a generation, that had been depicted in 100 plays and epic poems as a vast and terrible supernatural thing, was a man. He was a man named Jhin, a stagehand, quiet, self-effacing, with the calloused hands of someone who worked with ropes and backdrops and lighting rigs. He was not especially large. He was not fearsome in appearance. He was, in the plainest possible terms, ordinary looking, which is, of course, the most frightening thing he could have been. What happened at Jhin Pass in the final moments of the hunt has been told and retold so many times that it has acquired the quality of legend, which means it is difficult to know where the truth ends and the embellishment begins. What is known is this: Zed chased Jhin, and Jhin managed to incapacitate him, knocking the young apprentice out with the handle of one of his own blades. What is known is that Jhin had set a trap of his own, tying Zed to a chair and positioning him to witness something he was meant to witness. A woman named Yevnai, connected to both Shen and Zed, stood at the dock nearby. The performance was not just a killing. It was a message. It was directed, like everything Jhin did. Shen arrived and intervened, pinning Jhin against a wall. And then Kusho arrived, And what happened then is the decision that shaped everything that followed. Zed, shaking with anger, and something deeper and rawer than anger, moved to kill Jhin. He had watched what this man did to people. He had spent 4 years living in the shadow of it. He had seen the crime scenes and the grief and the families that had been hollowed out by loss. He had just watched Yevnai put in danger. He was not interested in mercy. He was not interested in Ionian philosophy about balance and the nature of evil. But Kusho stopped him. Kusho reminded both of his students that they had already gone beyond their sanctioned role. The Kinko Order was charged with maintaining the balance between realms, not with executing criminals. However horrific their crimes, killing Jhin would not bring justice. It would only make things worse. But there was more to it than that. Kusho carried a deeper concern. He worried about what the truth would do to Ionian society if it came out fully. That the Golden Demon was not a demon at all, but a man, a regular Ionian man who had moved through their world, eaten at their tables, worked at their festivals, and committed atrocities that they had attributed to supernatural evil. To reveal that would be to shatter something. The sense of safety that came from believing that such things were separate from them. It would, Kusho feared, either crush the trust that held Ionian communities together, or, worse, inspire imitation. So he made his decision. Jhin would be taken alive, quietly, and imprisoned at the monastery of Tuula, where he would be contained without fanfare or public trial. The story of the Golden Demon's capture would be told as a legend, a myth of demon banishment, celebrated without revealing what the demon actually was. Shen disagreed with the decision. He thought it was wrong, strategically and morally. But he was his father's son, and he accepted the judgment even as it sat uneasily in him. Zed could not accept it at all. He stood there, hands shaking, staring at the man who had defined the worst 4 years of his life, who was now being led away, breathing and intact, and he felt something crack inside him. Not his faith in Kusho as a person, at least, not yet, but his faith in the idea that doing things correctly, doing things by the rules, would result in the world making sense. That faith cracked, and the crack deepened over the years that followed, and it is part of why Zed became who he became. The capture of the Golden Demon would go on to be celebrated throughout Ionia. Plays were written about it. Poems were composed. Festivals marked the anniversary. In every version of the story, the hero was a great master who banished an ancient evil spirit from the land. The truth was a man named Kadar Jhin in chains, being walked to a cell. Tuula was a monastery prison, which is a particular kind of place that only a culture like Ionia's would think to build. It was not a dark dungeon. It was not a cage. It was a working monastery, a place of contemplation and study, surrounded by gardens and operated by monks, whose charge was simultaneously the spiritual practice of the monastery and the secure containment of the people imprisoned within it. Jhin would spend many years at Tuula. Exactly how many is uncertain. Ionian record-keeping of this period is inconsistent, and the nature of the arrangement meant that those in authority preferred not to dwell on the specifics. What we know is that he was there for a significant portion of his adult life, and that the experience was, in its strange way, one of the most formative periods of his existence. He was, by all accounts, a model prisoner. Not in the sense that he had reformed, or that the monks had succeeded in addressing his morbid fascinations. They tried. Nothing worked. But he was quiet. He was polite. Almost disconcertingly polite. with the soft manners of someone accustomed to making himself unnoticeable in other people's spaces. He kept his thoughts to himself and whatever was happening in the interior of his mind, whatever performances he was staging in the theatre of his own imagination, he gave very little of it away. The monks noted that he was exceptionally intelligent. A bright student, they said, which is a remarkable way to describe a serial killer in a monastery prison. He threw himself into the subjects available to him with genuine enthusiasm. He studied smithing, developing an aptitude for metalwork that would later have significant consequences. He studied poetry, writing in forms that the monks found unsettling in their precision. Not violent, exactly, but carrying a quality of cold exactitude that made them uncomfortable. He studied dance, becoming skilled at the formal Ionian movements, in a way that seemed almost to mock the spiritual intent behind them. He never revealed his real name. This is a small detail, but it matters. Jhin was already a name he had chosen, and it was the one he kept even in prison. The name that meant golden excellence, worn like a second skin even in captivity. Whatever name his father had given him, whatever name had been stitched into the fabric of his childhood, he had let it go entirely. Outside the walls of Tula, Ionia was changing. The Noxian invasion began, and with it came a kind of rupture that the nation had never experienced before. Noxus came not for conquest in any gentle sense. They came hard, with their vast armies and their philosophy that the strong take what they can, and the weak exist to be taken from. They moved across Ionian land, occupied provinces, dismantled the structures of governance and culture that Ionians had built over centuries. It broke things that could not easily be repaired. It created wounds. And in the aftermath of those wounds, in the political chaos and the dark reckonings of people who had lost faith in the old ways of doing things, new powers rose, factional alliances formed in the shadows, secret councils, cabals in the truest sense, groups of people bound together by shared interest and mutual danger, operating outside the normal structures of Ionian society. And some of those people knew about Jhin. Not just that he existed, that he was useful. In the aftermath of the war with Noxus, while Ionia was still licking its wounds, and the old political structures were still shifting and settling into new configurations, someone opened the door at Tula. The precise identity of those responsible has never been fully confirmed. What is understood is that a faction within Ionia's ruling council, a cabal operating in the shadows, made the deliberate decision to set Jhin free, not out of mercy, not out of any belief that he had changed or that justice had run its course. They freed him because they needed a weapon, and Jhin was the most terrifying weapon they could imagine. Ionia, in the turbulent aftermath of the Noxian invasion, was a nation pulling in multiple directions. Those who wanted peace at almost any cost. Those who wanted resistance. Those who wanted something darker. A reckoning. A message. A means of inspiring fear in those who would exploit Ionian weakness. The ninja and Wuju swordsmen had their own power and their own agendas. Various factions competed for influence. In this atmosphere, some members of the council decided that what they needed was not a sword or a shield. They needed dread. They needed the kind of weapon that makes your enemies uncertain, that makes the air itself feel dangerous. They needed something that could not be reasoned with, that had no political affiliation, and that left behind a message written in something impossible to ignore. They needed the Golden Demon. They gave Jhin access to resources he had never had before. Through the Kashuri Armories, a weapons manufacturer on the southern coast of Jhin that had, during the Noxian War, shifted from producing traditional swords and bows to developing new weapons that combined Ionian spirit magic with hextech principles learned from reverse engineering Noxian equipment. Jhin was given something truly extraordinary. A gun. Not an ordinary gun. Not a copy of a Piltovan weapon or a crude hextech device. Something that had been designed from Jhin's own specifications, built to embody his philosophy. The Kashuri armories poured enormous magical resources into its construction, and what emerged was unlike anything that had been made before. He called it Whisper, and with Whisper in his hands, and nearly unlimited funding behind him, Jhin walked back out into the world of Ionia. He was no longer just the golden demon of Jhin. He was something more deliberate, more funded, and more dangerous. He was the Virtuoso, and his performances were about to get much, much larger. To understand Jhin fully, you have to understand Whisper. The gun is not just a weapon, it is an extension of his mind. An instrument as specific and personal as a painter's particular brush or a musician's chosen instrument. It is the translation of everything he believes into physical form. Whisper is a precision firearm, unlike anything else in Runeterra. It combines Ionian spirit magic with the hextech principles that the Kashuri armories learned from studying Noxian and Piltovan weapons, but pushed far beyond any efficiency those systems typically valued. Where most hextech weapons are designed to use a small amount of magic very efficiently, Jhin's weapons use a great deal of magic. Extravagantly, deliberately, because for Jhin, excess in service of beauty is not waste but necessity. The gun holds exactly 4 bullets, not 6, not 10, not the variable capacity of most firearms. 4. It will always hold 4. And this is not an accident of engineering. It is a statement, mounted on Jhin's shoulder, feeding into Whisper, when the weapon is fully assembled, is a hextech mass accelerator, a device that powers and loads the gun, converting magical energy into the force that sends those 4 bullets at speeds and with effects that no ordinary firearm could produce. The whole assembly, the gun and the accelerator together, is somewhat imposing. It was designed that way. The performance requires a certain kind of staging, and the weapon is part of that staging. But the most extraordinary thing about Jhin's ammunition is not the speed or the force behind it. It is what the bullets do. Jhin crafts his own bullets. He infuses them personally with a particular kind of shape-shifting magic drawn from deep Ionian traditions, and this magic has a very specific, very deliberate effect. It reshapes what it touches. When one of Jhin's bullets strikes a person, it does not simply wound them, it transforms them. The magic in the bullet bends flesh and bone and blood toward the image that Jhin holds in his mind at the moment of firing. This is why his victims look the way they do. This is why the crime scenes from his earliest days had that quality that no investigator could quite name. That sense of intention in the arrangement of the body, of the corpse as artifact, rather than as aftermath. He was not positioning them after the fact. He was shaping them with the bullet. The murder and the artistic transformation were the same act. Each bullet, he has said, is a piece of his soul. His other weapons follow the same philosophical logic. The lotus traps, steel mechanisms in the shape of lotus blossoms that he plants in the ground, bloom when stepped on, releasing serrated metal petals in a controlled explosion that is simultaneously deadly and visually precise. Even his grenades are not simply grenades. The dancing grenade is designed to bounce, to ricochet, to pass through multiple targets in sequence, because for Jhin, A kill that touches only one person is less interesting than a chain of cause and effect. 4. Always 4. The number 4 structures everything Jhin does. Whisper fires 4 bullets, and the 4th one is imbued with greater power than the others. A crescendo, the climax of a musical phrase. His traps, his grenades, his ultimate weapon. The ability to convert Whisper into a shoulder-mounted long-range cannon called Curtain Call, which fires exactly 4 massive shots across an enormous distance. All of it returns to the number 4. The word Jhin itself has 4 letters. The number 4 in certain East Asian languages is associated with death. The word for 4 and the word for death are similar sounds, a near rhyme that cultures have found significant for centuries. And if you trace the letters J, H, I, N on a standard keyboard, your finger draws the shape of the number. It is as if the number found him before he found it, or as if he chose it so completely that it rewrote everything, including his own name. The obsession is not arbitrary. It is not the kind of thing that makes sense to an outside observer in a logical, linear way. But it makes sense inside the logic of Jin's own mind, where 4 represents something like completeness. A phrase that has 4 beats. A composition that reaches its 4th movement, the 4th shot that carries everything he has been building toward. 4 is not just a number to him. It is the shape of perfection. The mask Jhin wears over his face is white and featureless. A smooth, pale oval with narrow eye openings and no expression built into it. It is a theatrical mask in the Ionian tradition, of the kind that has been used in opera and drama for centuries. An actor's blank face, ready to become whatever the performance requires. Behind that mask is a man who has constructed an entire philosophy around the things he does. And this is what separates Jhin from the category of villain we usually encounter. He is not driven by rage, or hunger, or grief, or the desire for power in any conventional sense. He is driven by something that he himself experiences as aesthetic conviction. He genuinely believes that murder is art, not as a metaphor, not as a justification he has constructed after the fact to live with himself. He experienced it first. The compulsion, the vision of what could be made, the act of making it. And the philosophy came later, as an attempt to articulate what he already knew to be true in his bones. Violence, in his view, is not necessarily ugly. It can be directed, sculpted, given shape and meaning. A death that is merely wasteful, that leaves behind nothing but loss, is an offense against the world's capacity for beauty. But a death that is composed, that is set in context, that resonates emotionally and visually, that transforms the moment of ending into something that will be remembered, discussed, depicted in art itself. That is something else entirely. He calls his killings performances. He calls himself the virtuoso, which is a word that, in music, refers to a performer of exceptional technical skill. He sees himself not as a destroyer, but as a creator. And this is not delusion, exactly. Or at least, it is a delusion that is internally consistent in a way that makes it more unsettling than simple madness. What makes it truly disturbing is this. Sometimes, in the secondary effects of his presence in the world, he is right. Not morally right. Not in any way that justifies what he does, but factually correct, in the narrow, terrible sense. His killings are discussed. His crime scenes are depicted in plays and poems. The legend of the Golden Demon is one of the most enduring stories in Ionia. The capture of the Golden Demon, the event that sealed his first phase of freedom, became, by his own making, one of the great mythological narratives of his homeland. He created, through the act of murder, stories that outlived the people he killed, and that shaped the cultural memory of an entire region. He hates being ignored. He hates being called a monster without nuance, a murderer without artistry, a problem to be managed. He wants to be seen clearly, which is, perhaps, the most human thing about him, and the saddest. He wears a mask, and what he wants more than anything is for the world to see what the mask conceals, not his face, his vision, his inner life, the complexity of what he feels when he is creating. He is also, in his private moments, deeply self-conscious. Notes from those who have observed him closely suggest that beneath the grand presentation, the careful costuming, the theatrical manner, the precise and measured speech, there is a man who is aware of his own strangeness, who knows that the world does not see what he sees, and who finds that isolation genuinely painful. Not painful enough to stop, but painful in a way that is real. He carries himself with a deliberate elegance that reads, in public, as aristocratic or theatrical. His clothing is immaculate. His movements are considered. He speaks in a way that is almost musical. Measured cadences, careful word choices, the kind of speech that seems to be aware of itself as speech, rather than just communication. And internally, his voice is an almost constant attentiveness, noticing the details of every room, every person, every arrangement of objects and light and shadow, assessing, planning. The mind of a director who is always working. After his release, with the resources of the cabal behind him and whisper on his shoulder, Jhin's operations expanded beyond anything from his June days. He was no longer working in one province, with a handful of blades, operating on the margins of theatre troupes. He was operating across Ionia and beyond, moving between commissions like a visiting artist on an extended tour. The cabal used him to send messages to foreign dignitaries, whose actions threatened Ionian political interests. A body arranged in a particular way, left in a particular place, communicated things that no diplomatic letter could communicate. It said, plainly and visually, that there were forces in Ionia willing to do things that ordinary politics could not contain. Jhin was effective in this role, precisely because he was not just an assassin. He was a spectacle. The message was not in the death itself, but in the theatre that surrounded it. He worked for the Novori Brotherhood, a Ionian nationalist faction that operated in the shadows during and after the Noxian occupation. He carried out commissions for Noxus itself on at least one occasion, a fact that would horrify the people who had freed him as a weapon against Noxus, but which makes a grim kind of sense when you understand that Jhin's loyalty is not to any faction. It is to his art. He goes where the most interesting performances can be staged. He spent time in the cities of Piltover and Zaun, the vast industrial twin metropolises of invention and shadow that occupy the northwest of the Runeterra continent. There, he worked for what records describe as a shipping cabal, a criminal organization with connections across multiple factions. The specifics are not fully known, but what emerged from his time in those cities was, among other things, a confrontation with the Kinko ninja Akali who had tracked him there. That confrontation did not end the way Akali had hoped. Jhin captured her, not as a demonstration of simple physical superiority, but as a piece of the performance. He bound her and placed her with 3 others, a group of 4, hanging from a tree. He burned them. Akali survived, rescued by the combined intervention of Shen and Zed, who were also tracking Jhin's movements through the region. But the act itself was, in Jhin's own terms, the point. The rescue was not an inconvenience. It was part of the theatre. It gave the performance an audience that would carry the memory of it out into the world. He also attacked Zed's Order of Shadow during this period, striking at members of the Order with a deliberateness that went beyond mere commission work. This was personal, or as personal as Jhin's actions ever get. Zed had been the one to chase him down at Jhin Pass all those years ago. Shen had pinned him to the wall. Whatever Jhin felt about the people who had imprisoned him could not be reduced to a simple word, like resentment. But it was there, woven through his dealings with both men, in a way that made every encounter with them a kind of extended performance in its own right. He had also, in an act of extraordinary audacity, sent a messenger to Zed after his release. Just a messenger, bearing word from the Virtuoso, announcing himself, inviting the confrontation. Because what is a performance without an audience, and what is an artist without someone who knows the significance of the work? Of all the relationships that Jhin has with the living world, and they are not many, and most of them are defined by violence, or manipulation, or both, one stands out for its strange, sad, complicated quality: his relationship with Fai. Fai was a young Ionian artist, a painter of exceptional talent, heir to the Temple of Koyen. He worked with paint magic, an Ionian tradition of imbuing visual art with genuine magical properties, so that the paintings were not merely representations, but active objects, capable of affecting the world around them. He was gifted in a way that went beyond skill, reaching into something deeper, something that his own teachers at the temple had not always known how to cultivate. Jhin found Hui. How exactly they came into contact is not entirely clear in the records, but what followed is documented in its outlines. Jhin spent months, patiently, methodically, befriending the painter. He presented himself as someone who understood art at a deep level, as someone who saw what Hui was capable of and was not afraid of its full scope. This was, in a technical sense, true. Jhin did understand art at a deep level. He did see what Hui was capable of, but the motivation behind the friendship was not what Fai understood it to be. Jhin recognized in Fai something he found fascinating: suppression. Hui had tremendous power, artistic and magical and emotional, but he had been trained into restraint by teachers who could not handle the full intensity of what he could produce. He had learned to hold back, to work within boundaries, to not fully express what he felt and saw and believed. And Jhin, who believed that artistic suppression was one of the great crimes that the world committed against its creators, pushed Hui to let go of those boundaries. He encouraged him. He challenged him. He spoke to him in the language of art, which is the only language in which Jhin is ever fully himself. And under that encouragement, Hui began to access parts of himself he had kept closed. Then Jhin showed his true purpose. When he left the Temple of Koyen, he did not leave quietly. He destroyed 4 of the temple's most priceless works of art. He set fire to the 4th floor of the temple. He killed the 4 masters who had over the years most harshly chastised Hui and limited his artistic development. And he left a calling card, something that ensured Hui would know exactly who had done it and why. Because Jin's purpose was not to befriend Hui, it was to transform him. He had turned Hui's quest for answers and eventual vengeance into a piece of art, a piece in which Hui was both the subject and the medium, the grief, the anger, the long chase that would define Hui's life afterward. All of it was Jin's composition. He had taken a person and made him into a story. This is perhaps the most chilling thing that Jhin does. Not the killings, which at least follow a comprehensible, if grotesque, logic, but the way he shapes people who survive his attention, The way he turns their lives into his material without their consent, making them characters in narratives they did not choose and cannot escape. Wei would carry the shape of Jin's intervention in him for the rest of his life. That is what Jhin wanted. That is what he considers his masterwork with that particular subject. Even in their creative differences, and there were genuine creative differences, two artists with genuinely different visions of what art is for. Jhin respected Wei's talent. This is worth noting because Jhin does not often express respect for other artists. He tends to view them as either inadequate or as raw material. With Wei, there was something that approached genuine recognition, which makes what he did to him not a lesser crime, but a worse one. The betrayal of a connection that was, in Jin's limited way, real. What does Jhin look like under the mask? It is one of the most asked questions in any discussion of his character. And the answer is, we are not entirely sure, and that is deliberate. He is Ionian, which tells us something about the general features his heritage would suggest. He is a man of some age. By the time he is operating as the Virtuoso, with Whisper in hand and the backing of the Cabal, he is likely in his late 30s. The investigation and imprisonment took up a large portion of his adult life, and the years since his release have added to that count. He is described as not particularly imposing in appearance. Medium height, the hands of a craftsman, calloused from years of stagehand work, and later from the precise work of building and maintaining his weapons. The armor he wears over his body, dark fabric beneath a long white coat with golden detailing, creates a visual impression that is more theatrical than martial. He is not dressed for combat in the way a soldier is dressed for combat. He is dressed for performance. The mask itself is smooth white porcelain with narrow eye openings, no expression, no features, a blank face. And this blankness is not accidental. It is the most honest thing about him. He has spent his entire life constructing masks. The name Kada Jhin was a mask. The role of stagehand was a mask. The polite and quiet demeanor of the Tula, prisoner, was a mask. The theatrical grandeur of the Virtuoso is a mask. The white porcelain face is just the one he chose to wear on the outside, to make the fact of the masking explicit. He has said, behind every mask is another mask. He has said, only to the audience do I show my true face. Both of these statements are true. He performs, always and entirely. The question of what is underneath, the real Jhin, the one who was a child in Jhin, the one whose father ran a failing martial arts school, the one who first felt whatever he felt when he arranged something dead into a shape that satisfied him. That question does not have an easy answer. Maybe there is no bottom to the masks. Maybe the performance is all there is. There is one detail that speaks to something more fragile beneath the surface. He has been described as internally self-conscious, self-deprecating in a private way that never surfaces in public. Looking at himself and feeling a pang of what the records call self-conscious loathing. He is aware that his appearance, stripped of the costume and the mask and the staging, does not match the grandeur of his self-conception. He is aware that he is, at the physical level, just a man. He manages this awareness by never letting it surface where anyone can see it. He transforms it into precision, into the obsessive care with which he maintains his appearance, cleans Whisper's stock, arranges every element of his presentation. The anxiety about imperfection gets redirected into the absolute refusal to allow imperfection to exist in anything he controls. The story of Jhin cannot be told in isolation. from the stories of the three men who shaped its most important turns. Great Master Kusho, who made the decision that let Jhin live. Shen, who accepted that decision with quiet reluctance, and has been living with its consequences ever since. And Zed, who could not accept it, and whose inability to accept it set him on the path to becoming a different kind of monster. Kusho's story is a complicated one. The great master who was celebrated for the capture of the golden demon did not, in the long run, remain simply the wise and temperate figure of that legend. He faked his own death with Zed's help and became the leader of the Navori Brotherhood. Under a different identity, he pursued his own vision of what Ionia should be, a vision that was considerably less balanced and serene than the one he had represented as head of the Kinko Order. In this capacity, Kusho effectively released Jhin again. Not from a cell this time, but back into the world with more resources and more scope for his work. And the purpose was the same as it had been for the Cabal, to use Jhin as an instrument of terror, to destabilize rivals and enforce political will through the application of strategic, spectacular violence. This means that the man who first made the decision to imprison Jhin rather than kill him was, ultimately, the man who most benefited from having him alive and useful. Whether this was Kusho's long game from the beginning, whether the decision at Jom Pass was motivated less by Ionian philosophy and more by strategic foresight, is a question the lore leaves deliberately open. Jhin knows the truth about Kusho's supposed death. He knows the Old Master is alive and operating under a different name. He chose not to reveal this to Shen, who was grieving and searching for the truth about his father. He chose not to reveal it, partly because he could see that Zed was already moving toward a confrontation with Kusho, and Jhin preferred to let that play out. It is a more interesting narrative if it resolves itself through those who have skin in the game. Shen and Zed find themselves, repeatedly, forced to work together because of Jhin. Their relationship is its own complicated history. Former brothers of the same order, divided by philosophy and the weight of everything that Zed did after the investigation, brought together again and again by the specific threat that Jhin poses to both of them. Jhin understands this. He exploits it deliberately. He arranges situations designed to require their cooperation. Knowing that the cooperation is painful, that being in each other's orbit opens old wounds, and that this dynamic, two men who were once close and are now estranged, circling each other awkwardly in pursuit of a shared enemy, is itself a kind of performance. His relationship with Shen is characterized by Jin's resentment. He holds Shen partly responsible for the imprisonment, for the years in Tula that interrupted his work, and by a grudging acknowledgement that Shen is, in his way, also a person of principle, not a principle that Jhin shares, but a genuine one, which he finds more interesting than simple hypocrisy. His relationship with Zed is more charged. Zed tried to kill him. Jhin respects this in the abstract. The directness of it, the refusal to accept a compromise that seemed to betray justice, and the darkness that grew in Zed afterward, the turn towards shadow, and the willingness to do terrible things in pursuit of a vision. This resonates with something in Jhin. Not approval exactly, but a dark recognition, a sense of familiarity. He has, after his release, sought to put Zed and Shen in positions where he might destroy both of them. Not out of simple revenge, though there is that, but because the destruction of two such significant figures, brought about by a performance that required their cooperation to reach its climax, would be the most dramatically satisfying conclusion he can imagine for the narrative they began together at Jhin Pass. By the time we reach the most current accounts of Jhin's movements in the world, he has become something genuinely larger than what he began as. The stagehand of Jhin, working with key-infused blades in mountain passes, has become an international figure, known, feared, and in some quarters, disturbingly celebrated. He moves between commissions with the calm efficiency of a professional who takes pride in his work. Piltover, Zaun, Noxus, Ionia. Geography means less to him than narrative. He goes where the most interesting performances can be staged, where the audience is the right size, the setting the right quality, the resonance of the act likely to extend outward in ways that he can anticipate and appreciate. He has thought about Sona, famous Ionian musician who performs for vast audiences across the continent, and whose art genuinely affects people at an emotional level. Sona is, in his estimation, taking up space that he considers his own, the space of the Ionian artist whose work moves the world. He finds this intolerable in the specific, obsessive way he finds most things related to his art intolerable. He has not yet acted on these feelings in any direct way, but the fact that he has thought about it tells something about the way his mind categorizes the world into those who can be ignored, those who are useful, those who are adversaries, and those who are in some way competition. The number 4 haunts everything he does. Every performance concludes with a multiple of 4. Every arrangement of victims is a multiple of 4. His login music, composed specifically to accompany his introduction to the world, is built around 4-note motifs, written in a 4/4 time signature, with each bar divided into 4 distinct beats. The architecture of his obsession goes all the way down. He designs his own ammunition, infusing each bullet by hand with the magic that gives it its transformative properties. This is laborious work. He does it anyway, because the alternative, a bullet that merely kills, that merely ends, is not something he can accept. The 4th bullet is the most carefully crafted. The 4th bullet carries the most of him in it. The 4th bullet is the climax of everything the first 3 were building toward. He is, in his way, a perfectionist. He understands that perfection is impossible. He has said so himself, quietly and without much drama, in moments that suggest he is aware that his entire project is, in some ultimate sense, the pursuit of something that cannot be reached. But the impossibility does not stop the pursuit. If anything, it motivates it. If he could achieve perfection, he could stop. The impossibility means he never has to. In the end, when you pull back and look at the complete shape of Jhin's story, what you see is not simply a tale of violence. It is a study in what happens when genuine artistic sensibility is unmoored from empathy. When the capacity to see beauty, which is a real capacity and a genuine one, however grotesquely expressed, is cut off from the ability to feel other people's reality as real. Jhin was shaped by a world that valued performance above all else. He grew up watching theatre, absorbed the rhythms and logic of staged art, developed a deep understanding of how spectacle affects emotion, how a well-placed gesture makes an audience hold its breath, how the right lighting transforms a scene, how narrative structure creates expectation that resolution can either satisfy or devastate. These are real skills. These are real sensitivities. But somewhere in the failing school, in the shadow of Wuju's success, in the years of working backstage, while others received the applause, or perhaps simply in the particular wiring of a mind that worked differently from the beginning, something in him determined that he himself was the truest artist, that the most authentic performance was one that could not be contained by any stage, that used the world itself as material, and the world, by its indifference and its cruelty and its imperfect beauty, had given him all the material he needed. The people of Ionia still tell the story of the Golden Demon. They tell it wrong, in the way that all myths are wrong, which is to say, in the way that makes it bearable. In their version, the demon was a spirit, a thing from outside the natural order, caught and vanquished by a great master through skill and righteousness. They celebrate its capture. They light lanterns on rivers. They perform plays in which the hero banishes the evil. Somewhere, listening to those plays if he passes through, Jhin appreciates the irony. They are performing his work without knowing it. They are keeping his story alive, giving it audiences, ensuring it is not forgotten. The myth of the Golden Demon is, in its way, the longest-running performance he ever staged. He is still out there, still moving, still working, still counting. 1, 2, 3, and then the fourth, the one that carries everything. This is where we leave him, for now. Somewhere in the world, moving quietly through a crowd, with calloused hands and careful eyes and a white mask in a bag near a gun called Whisper, the man who used to be a stagehand in Jhin is thinking about his next performance. He is thinking about the arrangement, the lighting, the number of people required, the way the fourth act will resolve. He is calm. He is always calm. Calm is the state in which his best work happens, and he has had a lifetime to practice it. Jhin is not a simple villain. He is not simple anything. He is a man made of contradictions, of genuine sensitivity and absolute ruthlessness, of real intelligence and total moral vacancy, of artistic vision and complete human blindness. He wants to be understood. He wants to be seen. He has spent his entire life staging the most elaborate bids for attention in the history of his homeland, and in every sense that matters to him, he has been heard. We remember the Golden Demon. We tell the story, which is exactly what he wanted. Rest easy now. You have walked a long way tonight, through a dark part of a beautiful world. You have seen what happens when art loses its heart, when performance forgets that the people in it are real, when the compulsion to create outgrows the capacity to care about what is created, and perhaps in the quiet as you let this settle, you will find yourself thinking about the theatre troupes of Jhin moving from village to village through the mountain mist, about a boy watching from the wings with clever hands and careful eyes, about the moment, wherever it was, however early or late, when something turned.